The fork slipped from Jacob's fingers and clattered against the porcelain plate just as one of the men behind him leaned closer and muttered that some people should learn their place. The restaurant's chandelier shimmered overhead, crystal lights scattering across polished marble floors, while his 7-year-old son, Mason, froze mid-bite, eyes wide and confused. Across the table, a young woman he had met only 10 minutes ago sat trembling, her hand hovering near her untouched food, fear flashing across her face like lightning before a storm. And in that suspended second, when silence pressed against his chest like a weight, Jacob realized he had chosen the wrong table on the wrong day, or maybe the only right one. If this had happened to you, sitting there with your child watching, what would you have done? Would you have lowered your gaze and pretended not to notice? Or would you have risked everything you had left to protect a stranger? Jacob hadn't come to the Grand Wellington in downtown Chicago to be a hero. He had come because Mason had begged for pancakes like the rich kids eat. The place was too expensive for a single father living on overtime shifts and leftover pride, but it was Mason's birthday, and sometimes a father's love makes reckless financial decisions. Jacob still smelled faintly of engine grease despite scrubbing his hands twice in the gas station bathroom before coming in. He knew they looked out of place in that dining room filled with pressed suits and polished heels. He felt the glances. He always did. The woman sitting at the adjacent table had been alone when they arrived. Her name was Olivia. She had smiled at Mason when he dropped his napkin and helped him pick it up. There was nothing flashy about her, just a simple beige coat and tired eyes that didn't quite match the elegance of her surroundings. Jacob noticed the way she kept checking her phone, then glancing nervously toward the entrance. When the 4 men in dark suits approached her table, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. They didn't shout at first. Their voices were low, controlled, sharp like blades wrapped in velvet. One of them placed a thick envelope on her table. Another blocked her view of the door. Jacob heard enough words to understand it wasn't friendly. Investment mistake. Family reputation. Embarrassment. Payback. Olivia's voice trembled when she said she needed time. One of the men leaned down and whispered something that made her eyes well with tears. That was the moment Jacob's chest tightened. Mason tugged at his sleeve and whispered why the lady looked scared. That innocent question pierced him deeper than the men's intimidation ever could. He stood up before logic could stop him. He told them calmly that she was with him and that they were interrupting his son's birthday breakfast. It was a clumsy lie, but it was enough to shift attention. The men turned slowly, assessing him the way predators assess a wounded animal. Grease under the fingernails. Faded jacket. No security detail. Easy target. One of them laughed and told him to sit down. Another said he had no idea who he was interfering with. Jacob felt his pulse pounding in his ears, but he didn't move. He placed his body slightly in front of Mason, shielding him without thinking. He told the men they had chosen the wrong table, the wrong day, and the wrong people to intimidate. His voice didn't shake, though inside he was terrified. What if they had weapons? What if he lost his job over this? What if Mason got hurt because of him? But what if he did nothing? What lesson would that teach his son? The restaurant manager hurried over, nervous and unsure. Other diners stared, whispering. The tension coiled tighter. One of the suited men reached toward Jacob's shoulder as if to shove him aside. That was when Jacob grabbed the man's wrist and held it firm, years of manual labor giving him strength he didn't often notice. The dining room gasped. Olivia suddenly stood up, her voice breaking but firm as she told the men to leave. She told them she wouldn't sign anything under pressure. The authority in her tone surprised everyone, including Jacob. For a second, something shifted in their expressions. They exchanged glances, stepped back, and warned her that this wasn't over before walking out, shoes echoing against the marble. Silence returned slowly, like air filling a vacuum. Jacob realized his hands were shaking. Mason clung to his arm, eyes shining not with fear anymore but with something else, pride. Olivia looked at Jacob with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She thanked him softly and asked why he risked himself. Jacob shrugged, embarrassed, and said he couldn't let his son think it was okay to watch someone be cornered and do nothing. He admitted he wasn't sure he had done the right thing, but sometimes right feels dangerous. They resumed their seats, though the food had gone cold. Olivia insisted on paying for their meal, but Jacob refused politely. He told her he didn't need charity. She studied him for a long moment, noticing the exhaustion carved into his features, the careful way he folded the bill before placing it in his wallet, the worn edges of responsibility etched into his posture. Then something unexpected happened. The manager returned, pale and apologetic, and asked Olivia if she was all right. But the way he addressed her changed. Not as a customer. Not as a victim. As Miss Harrington. Jacob blinked. The name sounded familiar. Within minutes, 2 more men in suits entered, but these were different. Protective, alert. They went straight to Olivia, asking if she wanted security tightened. Jacob felt his stomach drop. Olivia Harrington wasn't just a nervous woman being bullied over an investment. She was the sole heir to Harrington Capital, a multi-billion-dollar investment firm headquartered in New York. The men who had confronted her were rival board members trying to pressure her into relinquishing control after her father's sudden passing. She had come to Chicago quietly to think, away from boardrooms and lawyers, to breathe like a normal person for once. And Jacob, the grease-stained mechanic, had stepped between corporate sharks and one of the most powerful young CEOs in America without knowing it. The weight of that realization pressed down on him. He felt small, foolish even. But Olivia's eyes softened when she saw his discomfort. She told him that for the first time since her father died, someone had stood beside her without expecting anything in return. No contracts. No media. No advantage. Just courage. She knelt beside Mason and asked what he wanted to be when he grew up. He said he wanted to be brave like his dad. Those words broke something open inside Jacob. Years of exhaustion, of wondering if he was enough after his wife passed away from cancer, of doubting every parenting decision, of feeling invisible in a city that rewarded wealth over decency, all of it collided in that single sentence. Olivia handed Jacob a card before leaving, not as a billionaire, but as a grateful human being. She told him that Harrington Capital funded vocational scholarships and small business grants. She said men who stand up for strangers are rare, and the world needs more of them. Weeks passed. Jacob didn't call at first. Pride is a stubborn thing. But when the garage he worked at announced layoffs, fear for Mason's future outweighed pride. He reached out, expecting a polite brush off. Instead, he was invited to New York. Months later, Jacob wasn't just an employee anymore. With financial backing and mentorship, he opened his own auto repair shop in Chicago, hiring other struggling single parents and veterans. It wasn't charity. It was partnership. And it was built on that one reckless act of kindness. Sometimes he would replay that morning in his mind, the trembling hands, the glaring men, the chandelier lights reflecting off fear. He would think about how close he had been to staying seated. What if he had? Olivia stabilized her company and restructured its leadership, earning headlines for her strength and integrity. But she often said in interviews that leadership wasn't learned in boardrooms, it was learned from ordinary people who refused to look away. On Mason's 8th birthday, Olivia sent a simple note. It said that the wrong table on the wrong day had turned out to be exactly the right moment. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something simple but important. If you had been sitting there that morning, would you have stood up, or would you have looked away? Tell me in the comments what you honestly believe you would have done. And if this story truly touched your heart, if it reminded you that courage doesn't wear expensive suits and kindness can rewrite destinies, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, but only if you believe the world needs more moments like this.